Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, March 2nd, 2026. And look, usually when we sit down at this desk, we're looking at something pretty mainstream. We're dissecting a Fortune 500 strategy, or we're looking at some massive tech trend that's disrupting Silicon Valley. But today, we're pivoting. We're looking at a stack of documents that feels really different. It feels intimate, almost secretive in a way.
Yeah, it's intimate, but it's also strangely technical. It's a very specific kind of document that the general public almost never gets to see.
Exactly. We are analyzing a set of sources revolving around an independent music label called Affartos. But we aren't just reviewing their albums or reading a Wikipedia page today. We actually have our hands on a document titled Guideline for Voice Talent. It's an internal briefing script.
Right. It was written specifically to tell American voice actors exactly how to represent this brand to the world. And honestly, reading an internal brief like this is often way more revealing than reading a polished press release.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a press release is the mask you wear for the party, right? It's polished, it's safe, it's focus grouped. An internal brief, that's the conversation you have in the mirror while you're getting dressed.
Exactly.
It reveals the insecurities, the aspirations, and the very specific image they are just desperate to project. It tells you what they actually value when they think no one else is listening.
And this image is just fascinating to dig into. We have a label based in Nahariya, Israel, which is this beautiful coastal city founded by a man named Andrey Brener. And before we even get to the music itself, before we talk about the guitars or the ambient soundscapes, we really have to talk about the name Affartos.
It's a heavy opener, for sure. Pronounced Affartos, with the stress on the second syllable. It sounds ancient because, well, it is. It's Greek.
Yeah.
And it translates to incorruptibility or imperishability.
Incorruptibility. I mean, that is a massive claim for a music label to make.
Right. Most labels name themselves after, like fruits or records or just something that sounds cool on a T-shirt. Naming your project Incorruptibility feels like a moral stance.
It absolutely is a moral stance. And the sources we have make it clear that this isn't just about the music lasting a long time, like a classic rock song that stays on the radio for 50 years. It's about the fundamental nature of the art itself.
How do you mean?
Well, think about the world we live in right now in 2026. It's a world of completely disposable content. We doom scroll past 15-second clips, we consume them, and we forget them instantly. Affartos is trying to create something that doesn't rot, something that stands completely outside of the decay of the trend cycle.
That's a really bold mission statement for an indie label.
Yeah.
But looking at the release schedule we have here for early 2026, the volume is immense. I mean, usually when people talk about high art and imperishability, they release one album every, 5 years?
Yeah, they pull a Stanley Kubrick and just disappear for a decade.
Exactly. But looking at the stats here, by March 2026, they have 32 albums and 19 singles.
It's a total paradox, isn't it? Usually, Incorruptible implies this slow, painstaking Michelangelo painting the chapel kind of speed. But Andrey Brener is outputting at the speed of a modern content mill. The core of our deep dive today is figuring out how those two things can possibly coexist. How do you mass produce soul?
Right. How do you create that sheer volume without it just becoming fast food music?
That is the exact tension we need to resolve for you today. So let's get into the actual machinery of this. Section 1 of our analysis is the philosophy. The sources keep using a very specific term, a Russian term, to explain how this whole operation works. Protochnost.
Protochnost. Break that down for me, because it sounds intense.
Protochnost. This is the engine room of the label. If you don't understand this word, you really don't understand the music they're making.
Okay, so what is the direct translation?
The direct translation is flow, but we have to be really careful here because in English, flow usually means, being in the zone, psychological flow.
Right, like you're shooting basketballs and you can't miss, or you're writing code and time just completely disappears.
Exactly. That's an internal psychological state. Protochnost is much more mechanical than that. It's closer to conductivity.
Conductivity. Like a copper wire.
Yes. Think of electricity. The wire doesn't actually create the electricity, right? The wire just provides the path of least resistance for the energy to move from point A to point B. Brener's foundational philosophy is that the musician is the wire.
So he doesn't see himself as the creator with a capital C. He's not the generator of the art.
Not at all. He views himself strictly as a conduit. The music exists somewhere else, Call it the spiritual realm, call it the ether, call it divine inspiration, whatever you want. And his job is simply to be conductive enough to let it flow into the material world without distorting it.
That's fascinating.
The sources actually describe the music as a regeneration tool. It's meant to transfer a state of being. So peace, focus, gratitude. It transfers that from that other place through him directly to the listener.
It completely changes the definition of success for an artist. Success isn't, I made this brilliant thing. Success is, I got out of the way and let this brilliant thing through.
Precisely. It's all about getting out of the way, removing the ego from the process.
Okay, that sounds beautiful and very spiritual. But I'm looking at the timestamp on these sources. It's 2026. We're living deeply in the age of generative AI. If I hear high volume output, and I'm just a conduit, my skepticism alarm immediately starts ringing. Is Protochnost just a fancy philosophical wrapper for I pushed a button on an AI generator and let the algorithm flow?
It's the defining question of our era, isn't it? Every single time we see high output now, we suspect the machine. And the guideline for voice talent is hyper-aware of this exact suspicion. It's actually quite defensive about it. It explicitly says, in bold letters basically, that this is absolutely not button-pushing creation.
So how do they prove that? Because if you're releasing 32 albums, how do you prove to the listener that it's not just an algorithm churning out generic elevator music?
This brings us to what I call the Pearl Principle. And I'll be honest, this was the most shocking data point in the entire stack for me. This is the statistic that completely stops you in your tracks.
Lay it on me. I love good stat.
The sources detail what they call an exhausting selection method. To get one single track released, one Pearl Brener generates and arranges approximately 50 versions.
Wait, 50? 5? 0?
50 for every single track you actually hear on Spotify or Apple Music.
So if he puts out a standard 10-track album, that means 500 pieces of music are created and 490 are just thrown in the trash.
Or archived deeply on some hard drive, yeah.
That is seemingly insane. From a pure business perspective, that is a catastrophic waste of resources. That is a 98% waste rate.
If you are a manufacturer, yes, it's a terrible waste, but if you are a filter, it's completely necessary. Think about diamond mining. You have to move absolute tons of earth to find one single gem. If you used AI or digital tools to just generate music and publish it, you're just selling the tons of earth.
You're flooding the market with dirt.
Right. The work of the artist in 2026 isn't necessarily playing the violins string by string anymore. It's having the taste, the ear, and the intense spiritual discipline to listen to 50 variations and say, no, no, no. No. Yes, that one.
That really redefines the role of the modern artist. The artist becomes the editor-in-chief of the machine. The artist is the curator of the vibration.
Precisely. And the sources emphasize that technically this is a hybrid approach. They aren't Luddites. They use advanced digital synthesis. But they blend it very carefully with vintage analog instruments.
So you might have this sweeping computer-generated soundscape, but it's anchored by a real physical guitar string vibrating in a room in Nahariya.
Correct. And the Pearl is that one specific moment out of 50 where the digital precision and the analog warmth lock together perfectly to conduct that Protochnost.
It's a really fascinating rebuttal to all the AI fear we see right now.
Yeah.
It essentially says, use the tools to generate abundance, but use your human soul to curate excellence.
Exactly. The incorruptibility comes entirely from the curation, not the generation.
Let's talk about what this incorruptible music actually sounds like. Because the catalog for early 2026 is all over the map. Section 2 of our deep dive, the landscape.
It's a wildly diverse ecosystem. The Voice Talent Guide highlights a few specific projects to help the American actors understand the vibe. They need to know the sheer range of what they're pitching.
One that really stood out to me was the Complete Guitar Collection 2026. Now, usually when I see something called Guitar Collection on a streaming service, I instantly think of generic stock music, like acoustic chill vibes for a coffee shop. But the descriptions here are obsessively specific about the actual gear being used.
They really are. It's audio fetishism in the absolute best way. They don't just say acoustic guitar, they specify Jose Ramirez.
For listeners who aren't massive gearheads or luthiers, what does that actually mean? Why name drop Jose Ramirez in an internal brief?
Because Jose Ramirez is the absolute gold standard for Spanish classical guitars. It uses nylon strings. It has a very specific, warm, round, incredibly intimate sound. It's the sound of a small room, wood, and human fingers. no plastic pick. It implies a certain romance, a very specific history,
And then they pivot immediately in the document to a Fender Stratocaster.
which is the complete sonic opposite. That's the electric sound of the 60s and 70s. Bright, cutting, glassy. It's the sound of rock and roll, blues, sharp articulation.
And then they list a Gibson ES-335.
The classic semi-hollow body. That gives you the warm, woody jazz and blues tone. By listing these specific instruments in the briefing document, Affartos is signaling something very important to the voice actors. They are saying, we care deeply about texture. They want the listener to literally feel the wood and the wire. It's a grounding technique.
Grounding feels really necessary here because on the other end of the spectrum, you have a release called Cognitive Flow, which came out in February. And this isn't about sitting back and enjoying the vintage texture of a guitar. This is highly functional.
Right. The source specifically calls it professional lo-fi designed for deep work sessions.
I see this everywhere now. Music is a sheer utility. Audio caffeine. I use it myself when I need to prep for these deep dives, honestly.
And it fits perfectly with the Protochnost philosophy. If the music is a conduit, then cognitive flow is a conduit for pure productivity. The science behind this, though the source doesn't get too bogged down in the white papers, is about occupying the conscious mind just enough to let the subconscious totally focus on the task at hand. It removes mental friction.
So you have the guitar collection for the audio connoisseur, Cognitive Flow for the remote worker, and then you have Enigma Modern Ambient Visions.
Which was released in January. This is described as modern soundscapes.
Right.
It's mysterious, very atmospheric. It's less about doing work and much more about just drifting.
And finally, in this section of the catalog, we have the album simply titled Nahariya.
The conceptual ode to the home city.
This feels like the emotional anchor for the whole label. The source says it combines atmospheric landscapes with the composer's deeply personal experiences of the coast.
This is a crucial move for the brand. Without this album, Affartos could just be a faceless digital entity floating somewhere in the cloud. By tying the music directly to Nahariya, to the specific humidity of the air, the sound of the Mediterranean waves, the ancient history of that city, it gives the Incorruptibility a physical address. It makes it real. It essentially says to the listener, this music was made right here by a real person looking at this exact sea.
It's interesting you mentioned the sound of the waves, because water seems to be a recurring theme, right? The flow, the coast. But the biggest project, the flagship that all these internal documents are pointing toward, trades the water for snow.
Yes. This brings us to section 3, Beyond the Wardrobe.
This is the big one, releasing April 10th, 2026.
The sources describe this as a cinematic fantasy saga. And they really aren't being subtle about the inspiration here. It is explicitly a tribute to C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia.
As a kid who spent an embarrassing amount of time checking the back of closets for fur coats, this instantly resonated with me. But musically, the comparison they make in the brief is incredibly bold. They cite Harry Gregson Williams,
who scored the massive Disney Narnia films. That is a huge orchestral Hollywood blockbuster sound. Big sweeping brass, massive string sections, thunderous choirs. That is a very, very expensive sound to emulate.
But here is the twist. And I actually had to reread the source on this to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. There is a production constraint on this album that seems to completely contradict the idea of an epic saga. Because usually epic means loud drums.
The no drums constraint.
Right. The source explicitly says the album contains NO drums and NO percussion. 0. How do you do epic without percussion? How do you score a battle scene or a long journey without a driving drum beat?
It's a brilliant creative restriction, honestly. Brener has deliberately removed the most obvious tool for driving energy, the drums, and forced himself to find rhythm elsewhere. The source explains that the propulsion for the album comes entirely from texture, specifically string ostinatos.
Define ostinato for us, just so we're all on the same page.
An ostinato is a short, repeating musical phrase. Think of it kind of like an engine motor. Da, 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 da. It creates a relentless sense of forward motion, of urgency, without ever needing a bang or a crash.
And they also rely heavily on pizzicato double bass.
Right. Pizzicato is when the string player puts down the bow entirely and plucks the thick string with their finger. Thump, thump.
And the source gives us a really specific visual metaphor for why they chose this technique.
They say the pizzicato mimics gentle footsteps in the snow.
I just love that detail.
It's perfect, isn't it? Think about the Narnia setting. The 100-year winter. It's freezing. It's completely silent. Snow absorbs sound in real life. A big crashing cymbal or a booming snare drum would just feel wrong. It would be too modern, too aggressive. It would break the magical spell. But the low pluck of a bass string, That sounds exactly like Mr. Tumnus tiptoeing past the White Witch's spies in the woods.
It creates instant intimacy. It pulls you into the scene rather than blowing you out of your seat with sheer volume.
Exactly. It completely transforms the word epic from meaning loud to meaning significant.
Let's look at the actual track list, because the sensory details provided in the brief are just incredibly rich. Track 01, Shadows of the Attic.
This sets the entire scene. The source mentions magical wind chimes and a glittering celesta.
A celesta is that keyboard instrument that sounds like tiny bells, right?
Yes, exactly. Tchaikovsky made it famous by using it for the Sugar Plum Fairy in The Nutcracker. The source explicitly calls the celesta the sound of falling snow. It has that very crystalline, cold, magical quality. And then, cutting right through that coldness, you have a solo flute and a duduk.
I know the flute, obviously, but what on earth is a duduk?
The duduk is an incredibly ancient Armenian woodwind instrument. It's traditionally made of apricot wood. It has a massive double reed. And it really doesn't sound like a normal crisp flute. It sounds human. It sounds like a person crying or singing. It has this incredible, mournful, velvety texture to it.
Using an ancient Armenian instrument to represent a mythical faun in an English children's fantasy story. That is a very Affartos choice. It's that hybrid philosophy again.
It connects the fantasy to a deep, ancient sadness. The source notes the melody is sad but playful. It captures the tragedy of Narnia, perfectly, a winter without Christmas, but also the underlying hope.
Then we move deeper into the album. Track 09, The Old Magic. Or The Deep Magic?
The tone shifts dramatically here. We leave the attic and the gentle snow, and we go straight to the stone table. It's a dark, emotional orchestral score. Deep solo cello and Gregorian chants.
Low male voices. That adds a massive weight of history. That feels very monkish, very sacred.
And here is a technical detail for the deep audio nerds in the audience. The source mentions that this specific track uses 432 hertz tuning.
Okay, we definitely need to unpack this. Standard musical tuning is 440 hertz, correct?
Right. If you go to a symphony orchestra concert anywhere in the modern world, the A note they all tune to is vibrating exactly 440 times per second. That's been the strict international standard since the mid-20th century.
So why deliberately change it to 432 hertz for this one track?
There is a long-standing, somewhat controversial belief in certain musical and spiritual circles that 432 hertz is more natural. Proponents argue it's mathematically consistent with the universe's geometry, or that it's inherently softer and more healing on the human ear.
Is there hard science to that, or is it purely a vibe thing?
It's mostly vibe and metaphysics, honestly. But, strictly physically speaking, it does lower the pitch slightly. It makes the strings slightly looser on the instruments. It creates a demonstrably warmer, mellower sound. By detuning the old magic to 432 hertz, Brener is trying to subliminally signal to the listener that this specific track is coming from a totally different dimension. It literally vibrates differently than the pop song you just heard on Spotify.
It's a sonic cue for otherness.
Exactly. It disorients you just enough to make you really pay attention to the shift in the atmosphere.
And then we reach the resolution. Track 10, Crowning of the Kings.
We get the noble French horns coming in, and a wordless boy soprano solo.
A boy soprano, the ultimate musical sound of innocence.
The source describes it as having a wholly majestic feel. So the album basically takes you on the full narrative arc of the books, from the quiet mystery of the attic through the dark danger of the deep magic to the triumphant golden throne of Cair Paravel. It's rich storytelling without a single word of dialogue.
It's a saga. And honestly, the life of the man who wrote it seems to mirror a saga too. Because when I read section 4 of our packet, the biography of Andrey Brener, it felt like I was reading a script for a prestige television drama.
You really can't separate the music from the man here. The whole philosophy of incorruptibility and flow didn't just come from reading a textbook, it came from raw survival.
Let's trace this path for everyone, because he certainly didn't start in a high-tech studio in Nahariya.
No, not at all. The story begins in the Kemerovo region, deep in Siberia.
Siberia, we are talking about rural Russia. Freezing cold, industrial, definitely not the sunny Mediterranean coast.
And the career path wasn't exactly music prodigy either. The source lists his early jobs: sewing factory worker, general construction, taxi driver.
This is hard, grueling physical labor. This is working with your hands in the cold.
And the personal life was a massive struggle too. The biography in the brief is surprisingly vulnerable about this. It explicitly mentions years of infertility. It mentions deep, grinding financial hardship. They were living paycheck to paycheck, desperately trying to start a family, working out in the cold.
But then The biography pivots. It lists these turning points.
Hmm.
And the language used to describe them is, well, it's miraculous.
It really is. Brener frames these events not as lucky breaks or coincidences, but as direct divine interventions.
Take the fertility treatment, for example.
Sure.
They needed money for a procedure. It was mathematically impossible on their salaries.
And the source says his boss's wife just gave them 50,000 rubles, a complete gift, no strings attached.
And the land sale. This one reads like pure fiction. They had this small plot of land, 18 acres out in the country that they bought cheap. Later on, they needed exactly 150,000 rubles for another clinic procedure.
Right, so Andrey puts up an ad for the land. He just completely makes up the price, 150,000, because that's the exact number they needed. Not market value, just the need.
And immediately, a woman calls. She doesn't haggle. She doesn't negotiate. She just buys it.
And the direct result of that specific money was the birth of his daughter, Justinia.
Who he refers to in the documents as the Pearl.
Which brings us right back to the Pearl principle in the studio. Do you see the connection?
I completely do. The Pearl isn't just a clever metaphor for picking a good song out of 50. It's a profound metaphor for something incredibly precious that you have to wait for, something that only comes out of deep struggle and grace.
Exactly. If you deeply believe your own child is a literal miracle that came after years of exhausting selection and struggle, then treating your art with that exact same level of agonizing rigor makes perfect sense. He treats every single song like a miracle he has to patiently wait for.
So they have the child, they move to the countryside, but the journey isn't over. In 2020, they pack up and move to Kaliningrad.
This is described in the text as a spiritual migration. They felt actively led to move. And this period, from 2020 to 2022, is framed as a time of intense spiritual listening and preparation.
The sources mention prophecies here. Now, usually we analyze business strategy on this show, but we have to treat the source material on its own terms to understand the brand. And the text describes reports of prophetic words in their church community about new ways of seeing.
There is one specific anecdote in there that genuinely gave me chills. Andrey is seeking direction for his life and his music. He feels too many people are giving him conflicting advice, so he prays a very specific prayer. If you want to speak to me directly, close the mouth of the prophet.
He wanted the direct line, no human operator in between.
Right. And according to his own account, the very next day at a prophetic school, the prophet looks at him and says, "I see nothing. It's like a thick fog. God has hidden you from me."
That is intense.
It emboldened him completely. It confirmed that he was supposed to trust his own intuition, his own direct connection, which eventually led to the realization that the promised land they were constantly praying about wasn't just a metaphor for a good life.
It was literally the country of Israel.
Right. The Aliyah,
Yeah.
the formal immigration to Israel in 2022.
And again, the wild coincidences just pile up in the timeline.
He learns about the accelerated repatriation program exactly on his birthday, April 11th.
It's like the universe was dropping massive breadcrumbs for him.
They get essential assistance from the Jewish Agency, the Sakhnat, and Christian organizations. They fly out and they finally settle in Nahariya.
And suddenly the whole coastal city vibe of the music makes total sense. This isn't just a guy who happens to like the beach. This is a guy who traveled from the frozen sewing factories of Siberia to the warm Mediterranean coast, deeply believing he was led there by a higher power.
It completely contextualizes the incorruptibility claim. When you feel your entire life has been guided by miracles, you don't want to make disposable TikTok music. You want to make something that actually honors that journey. You want to create music of gratitude.
And it explains the hybrid nature of the label, too. You have the Russian-Siberian roots, the depth, the coal struggle, the Duduk sadness, and you have the new Israeli reality, the sun, the sea, the flow.
And you see this integration play out in the actual output. Section 5 of our outline covers the vocal projects, and they are linguistically all over the map.
Right, it's not just instrumental soundscapes. They're actively releasing tracks in Russian and Hebrew.
There are albums like Eternal Flame of Friendship and God is Invisible, which are released entirely in Hebrew. This shows a real effort to not just live in Israel physically, but to become part of the cultural and linguistic fabric.
But they also have these Russian language lyrical projects. Bitter Chocolate, which releases in March 2026.
Exploring the duality of the human experience, the tartness and the sweetness. Again, a very mature, grounded theme. It acknowledges that life isn't just purely sweet. The bitter struggle is a necessary part of the flavor profile.
And then there's Sapphire, released in January. This one is described as a mix of, wait for it, epic rap and bard acoustics.
That is a genre combination you definitely don't hear every day. Bard acoustics implies traditional storytelling, folk tradition, sitting by a fire with a wooden guitar. Epic rap implies highly modern rhythm, flow, and aggression. Again, it's the hybrid approach. It's taking two completely disparate things that shouldn't work together and finding the one pearl where they actually do.
And there is a really clear desire to share this entire process with the world. The sources mention a podcast initiative that launched in February 2026.
Right, The Mystery of Affartos Productivity. It's a video podcast series. And from a brand perspective, I think this is incredibly smart. When you have a backstory this rich, the Siberia to Israel journey, the insane 1 in 50 selection process you need to tell people about it. You need to pull back the curtain and show the behind-the-scenes discipline.
Which brings us full circle right back to the document we started this whole dive with, the Guideline for Voice Talent. At the end of the day, when you strip away the philosophy, this document is a plea.
It's a very direct call to action.
The script literally asks the American voice talent to say, support this young, amazing, and ambitious project. It positions Affartos as an independent voice from the heart of Nahariya, striving to be a global bridge.
It's the classic independent artist struggle in the modern age. You have the grand vision, you have the impeccable product, you have the incredible cinematic backstory. Now you just need the ears. You need the actual people to press play on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, and iHeartRadio.
So let's zoom out for a second and synthesize all of this. What does this all actually mean for you, the listener? We've looked at the philosophy of flow, the brutal pearl principle, the snowy soundscapes of Narnia, and the miracles of Siberia.
I think Affartos represents a really fascinating counter-movement in culture right now. We are living in a time of absolute content saturation. Everything is fast, everything is automated, everything is disposable.
Fast food music?
Exactly. And here's a project that audaciously calls itself a creative reserve. It says, no, we are going to generate 50 things just to throw 49 of them away so that the one thing we finally give you is perfect. It says we are going to use high-tech AI tools, but we are going to deeply ground them in ancient Greek philosophy and biblical gratitude.
It's a rebellion.
Incorruptibility is the ultimate rebellion against a disposable culture.
That is a deeply powerful thought to leave on. When everyone else is rushing to just generate more, perhaps the true lasting value lies in generating better.
And doing it with a real spirit of service, being a pure conduit, not just a manufacturer on an assembly line.
Well, if you want to hear what incorruptibility actually sounds like, or if you just want to hear what Footsteps in the Snow sound like on a pizzicato double bass, the album is Beyond the Wardrobe, and it drops on April 10th.
I know I'll be listening for those wind chimes.
Me too. And for you listening at home, I hope this deep dive gave you a totally new way to listen not just to Affartos, but to the story and the struggle behind the music in your own library. Catch you on the next deep dive.